Hello, welcome. My name is Megan McQuaid, and I'm the director of the Nursing Assistant Training Program for the Healthcare Apprenticeship Consortium. We will be going over the Washington State NAC written exam, and I have some review tips and test taking tips for you. So just an overview of this presentation. We'll have some tips for the day before the test, breakdown of the test itself, and the different components and subjects covered throughout the test. Reviewing the types of questions that they can ask you, and we also have some practice questions built in. We'll review the ID requirements for the day of testing. Testing can either be done at an in-person facility, where you go and use a computer at the facility, or it can be done at home on a personal computer, making sure that running a test and making sure that you have the required software on your computer to be able to take it at home. And then finally, just knowing your resources and what's available to you and how we can help you hopefully pass your NAC test and get certified. So before the test, don't study. Don't be staying up all night long studying. You know what you know at that point. The day before the test should have some light studying, maybe review some note cards with vocab, do a couple review questions, but definitely do not be staying up till 3 a.m. and, if your test is at 9, studying and trying to cram. Your brain knows what it knows, and it really just needs to rest and take a break, and you just need to take care of yourself the day before the test. Eating a well-balanced meal before you take the test, even if you have a morning test and you're not really a breakfast person, just getting something in your body. Your brain needs that energy, that water, that glucose. So make sure to eat and drink water and get plenty of rest the night before. During the test, your brain needs oxygen to function, obviously. But sometimes when we're in high stress situations, high stake situations, we tend to get anxious, hold our breath, and clamp down. So to help relieve that, we want to be taking deep breaths and kind of find a rhythm for yourself. After every 5 questions, maybe take 10 seconds, take a deep breath, inhale, exhale. Maybe after every question, take a deep breath, exhale. But just remembering to breathe is helpful. It helps slow your heart rate down, helps bring that blood pressure down, helps kind of let go some of that tension and anxiety. Close your eyes and just take a breath. You have time. You have plenty of time to do this. But that helps get some oxygen flowing to your brain and actually helps you think better. So some tips with the NAC test. So it's comprised of 70 questions, 70, and you have 2 hours to finish that. So if you do the math, it's almost a minute a question, a little less than a minute for every question. You do not need to get an absolute 100% to pass. You just need to get at least an 80%. So I believe you can miss 12 questions. Each question will have 4 possible answers, meaning it's multiple choice, and you have to choose the best option. So no written, no fill in the blanks. These are all multiple choice. And you don't want to skip a question without answering, even if you have zero idea of what the question is or what the answer is. At least choose something. You don't get penalized for choosing incorrect, but you do not get any points or you don't get anything if you leave it blank. So it's not advantageous to leave anything blank. And the test questions, they're designed to measure your knowledge, so that's not meant to be tricking you. So don't read too far into the question. Read the question at face value, and go with your gut. Go with your gut. Okay, so test breakdown. So these are the different topics or subjects covered throughout the test. This is not necessarily the order that you'll see it in the test, so it's mixed up all over. But you can look at how many questions. So the topics are on the left-hand side. The middle is the percentage of the exam. So what's the percent of those specific topics? And then, or you can look at how many number of questions there are in the test based on those topics. So out of 70 questions, if you look right in the middle there, 23 questions are based on basic nursing skills. So infection control, safety and emergency, therapeutic and technical procedures, data collection, and reporting. So therapeutic and technical procedures, those could be those 23 skills that you learned. They can ask you about those skills. data collection, that is getting information or getting data. Data can be vital signs, so knowing your vital sign ranges and what to be reporting. Those can be those questions. Infection control, anything pertaining to infection control, safety, stuff like that. So that is a bulk of your test, almost, a little more than a fourth, a third of your test. So if you do some smart studying, and you're taking your practice quizzes, your practice tests, and you are doing great at, the activities of daily living, and you see that you're missing some infection control, you definitely want to spend a lot of your time or majority of your time studying the questions that or the topics that there are a lot of questions of, if that makes sense. So the top two, activities of daily living and basic nursing skills, and even going into emotional mental health needs, those are, your top four. Don't spend hours and hours, days and days on something that only has two questions, like spiritual and cultural needs or legal and ethical behavior, because again, you don't have to get a complete 100%. So what I'm saying is study and concentrate on sections of the test that there's a large percentage of that test, of the part of that test. A quick ID policy review. So Credentia and Pearson VUE is where they run the test, or this is where you're either going to take the test. So make sure that you have a primary ID, and you can read over here, and you can also find this in your booklet or online. But your ID, your first and last name, must match what you gave to register for the test, or that you registered for the test with. And then the ID has to be a government ID. So a primary ID can be a passport, driver's license, military ID, like a state ID card if you don't have your driver's license, green card, local language ID. Those are all considered primary IDs, and with that, it should have your picture on it, and it needs to be the original. It can't be a copy of it. It should have your picture and signature. A second ID can be anything containing at least your name and the signature. So something like a debit card, a credit card, a library card, just make sure it's been signed and it has your name on it that matches your ID. It cannot be an expired form of an ID, and it needs to have the signatures on it. If you have questions or you need like an ID exemption or a waiver, there's a website there, and there's also a phone number you can call in your booklet. Okay, tips for answering questions. So first off, take your time. One of the most common problems is that test takers are failing to read the entire question. You might start to read the question and think you saw a hot word, you're like, oh, I know what that answer is going to be, and then you don't even finish reading the rest of the question and you just go hurry up and pick an answer. But you might have missed an important key word towards the end of the question, like maybe a not is involved, or something to that effect. So definitely take a breath. If you find yourself skimming, go back, read the entire question, even though you know what it says or you're a quick reader. Just calm down, read the entire question, read all of your options, take your time. You have plenty of time. Put the question in your own words. If you've read the question and you're just kind of a little bit confused, or you don't like how it's worded, reword the question in your own words. If you have no idea what the question is asking, or you don't really have a clue about the answer, just look for specific words then. If you know cardi means heart, maybe you try to find one of the answers that is pertaining to the heart. So this is where vocab and knowing your medical terms is helpful, just to help you answer questions you might not know the answer to initially. But being able to put the question back into your own words really helps your brain to comprehend, understand it. Then you can also go and read through the answers and read those in your own words, or rethink those in your own words, and then again pick the best answer based on your own words and understanding. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, another thing is to stay under the umbrella. So the umbrella is just a metaphor of, the whole big picture. So some questions, two or more the answers for some questions, 2 or more of those options might be similar and, in your opinion, part of the umbrella answer. However, you can only choose one answer, so you want to pick the best answer in these situations. So the next slide is an example of an umbrella question. Which is the best measure of the patient's physical status? Pulse, temperature, vital signs, blood pressure. So if I were taking this test and this popped up, I would reread the question again. Which is the best measure of the patient's physical status? So I'm looking at the word physical. So that means their physical or their actual body. Pulse, temperature, vital signs, blood pressure. So in my mind, I know pulse is a measure of physical status, is a measure of how the heart is working physically. Temperature, how the body's hot or cold. Vital signs, this seems to encompass or be the umbrella, the coverall of pulse, temperature, and blood pressure. So I would choose vital signs because it's giving you it's the answer that encompasses all the other answers. So B, yes, is right. It is a measure of physical status, but the best measure are vital signs, or BC, vital signs. Key into key terms. So very few absolutes occur in patient care, especially when selecting the best test option. So these are rarely correct. So if the test option or the answer option has some of these words in it, it's rarely the answer. Always, never, all, most, none, every, except. If one of those words are a part of the option, just choose another option. So an example for this: when feeding a client who cannot feed themselves, what should you do? Always offer water first. Keep them in an upright position for at least 30 minutes after their meal. Never give them solid foods. Make sure most of their food is sugar-free. So when I'm looking at this, I want to eliminate ones with those absolute words in it. So A, always offer water first. I'm going to get rid of that. C, never give them solid foods. I'm also going to get rid of that. So now I'm left with B and D. Then another component, never look too far into this. So the question never mentioned anything about the patient's diet. There, you are just strictly, if you could, feeding someone who cannot feed themselves, what should you do? So their food might not need to be sugar-free. So don't read too far into that question. So the best option would be B. All of the other options has keywords that are absolutes or just have nothing to do with what the question is asking you. Opposites attract. So look for opposite options. Usually one of those is correct. So again, we can narrow some down. For example, front to back, left to right, open to close. So when you're reading your question and then you're looking at your options, look at those options that have an opposite in them. So when washing the perineum of the female resident, in which direction should the washcloth be applied? From the front to the back of the perineum, from the middle of the perineum to the top of the perineum, from any direction as long as the washcloth is wet and warm, from the back of the perineum to the front. So if we're looking for opposites, both A and D contain opposites, front to back and back to front. Now we just need to use our knowledge of that skill and infection control. So again, vocab word, perineum, that's also one of the skills. So perineum is the genital region of a female client. So we always want to be moving front to back of the perineum for infection control purposes. All the feels. When answering a communication type question or one requiring a response, choose the option that acknowledges or deals with the patient's feelings. So we always want to acknowledge patient feelings and not ignore. So reading this question, a resident is upset and crying over being admitted to the hospital. How should the nurse aide respond? A, tell the patient that it is normal and not to be upset. B, leave the patient alone and let them cry privately. C, change the subject to help them forget about their situation. Or D, sit with the patient and allow them to talk about their feelings. So again, all the feels, we want to choose D. because it addresses the patient feelings. A, B, and C all either dismiss the patient's feelings or ignore them. Safety first. So going, back to the options, or the test subjects, I'm sorry. Safety and patient well-being are always going to be the best response. So if the question asks, what would you do first, or your immediate response, you want to choose the option that protects the patient's safety and well-being. So look for those clues. For example, the question might sound something like the first thing the nurse aide would do, the most important step, which is the best response, what should be reported immediately. These are urgent words. Also, you need to be reading the questions completely, or you might miss one of these words. So we always want to note first thing, most important. So an example question for this, the first step in preventing the spread of infection is which of the following? Advising the patient to cover their mouth and nose when they sneeze or cough, keep the patient's room clean, make sure the trash is emptied twice a shift or when it is overflowing, or hand washing. So all of these are steps in preventing the spread of infection. The first step in almost every skill to prevent infection is hand washing. If hand washing is option, it's usually the correct option. Which of the following should be reported to the nurse immediately when the resident is using splints for ambulation? Sweating, difficult to apply, pain with use, refusing to wear the splint. So patient safety and patient's well-being, that includes pain or discomfort. So pain should not be happening. If you were looking and reading this question and you didn't know what splints or ambulation meant, then you could still, deduce or, pick the best answer by just following that clue of always pick patient safety or comfort first. Also, when you're getting these questions, nothing's going to be underlined, bolded, italicized. It's going to look exactly like this. So that's why you need to carefully read the question so you can see those words like immediately or the omission words like not. Don't add to the question. Read the question at face value. A question you read might remind you of an experience you've had with a patient or an experience that you've had at clinical or that you've read something in the book, but you need to read the question as it is and select the best answer that you are given in the options given. Don't add to the question. Choosing the best answer. Some will give you options that are all correct. Like all of those are technically, like one of the first questions we did, all of those are technically measures of the patient's physical status. The best answer, however, was vital signs. Okay, here's another practice question. Which of the following patients has the greatest risk for falling? The hearing impaired patient, the patient who uses a cane, the patient who often has visitors and a cluttered room, the patient who has difficulty with balance. So again, all of these answers are technically correct, but the greatest risk for falling would be the patient who has difficulty with balance. Difficulty with balance is most related to falling, and that's the greatest risk of falling. Watch out for the not. Be sure to read the question carefully. Again, carefully read your questions. Some will ask you to identify the option that is not correct. You also might see things or questions like least likely, not an action, not a sign. Which of the following is not a sign of impending death? Again, not going to be underlined, it's not going to be bolded, italicized, it's going to look just like this. So if you're reading quickly, you could quickly read which of the following is a sign of impending death. Read decreased respirations, that sounds like a sign of someone's dying. Check A, move on. When really it's asking not a sign of impending death. A, decreased respirations. B, irregular, weak, and thready pulse. C, skin cool and moist. D, stable vital signs. So the answer is D, stable vital signs. A, B, and C are all signs of impending death. D is not. Another way you could look at this question is, which of the, like, 3 of the following are signs of impending death, 1 is not. Choose the one that doesn't match, or that doesn't seem to align with the rest of these. So if I wasn't sure what impending death meant, it means, death is coming or someone is actively dying. I could look at these 4 options and say, okay, decreased respirations, irregular, weak and thready, skin cool and moist, all of those kind of sound like they could be in the same, but stable vital signs sounds more to its own thing, or more of the opposite of those other 3. Again, reviewing a test breakdown again, study smart. Take those practice tests in the back, towards the back of the practice test that you were given, is a key, and it will tell you the different subjects that those answers, or that those questions related to. So I say take the test, highlight the ones you've got incorrect, and see if there's a trend. Are you missing a lot of basic nursing skill questions? Then go back to the book, go back to Ruby, study infection control, safety, therapeutics, and data collection. Really look at those versus spending time on restorative skills and activities of daily living, which you did fine on. Other tips, go over your vocab, know your vocab and med terms. It might just save you on a question, because you could at least identify some vocabulary words and some identifying words to help you answer the questions. Review Chapter 9 in the Mosby's textbook. That's based on medical terms. And that should help you study up on those medical terms. Create flashcards, physical flashcards. You can use regular paper, scratch paper, printer paper, flashcards, whatever. Write your definition on one side, write the answer on the other, just to get those in your brain. Know the steps of the 22 skills, so you can be asked about any of those steps. There is a link, and I can send out this PowerPoint out, but if you can also just Google the NNAAP Nurse Assistant Handbook link. A hard copy was also sent to you in your folders. Know your ranges for vital signs. It's in Ruby or on Ruby, which you still have access to. Also, a small plastic handout came in your Mosby's book that is actually a nice little quick study. And then take as many practice tests as you can. Time yourself. You have about 2 hours to get a test, to take the whole test, but it just is kind of nice to get yourself in the habit of timing yourself to see how long it takes you. You were given 3 practice tests, physical copies, and then your book has 2 additional practice tests. Let us know if you need some one-on-one tutoring. Dee Nissel is someone we work with. You can also email Shelly or I. I can also set up some one-on-one study time with you. Practice, practice, practice. There's 2 big practice tests that are 70 questions long, but then there's also practice questions at the end of each chapter. Looking at that NNAAP Washington State Nurse Handbook, there's also questions located in that practice test from Shelly that were in your handbook. The CNA or NAC practice question apps, some are free, some are a few dollars, definitely can use for free if just needed. One that I definitely know is on iPhone and on Androids it's called the Cna Test Genie App. It is free. There are some ones that you can, I wouldn't necessarily purchase the whole subscription, but you definitely can get a lot of test questions for free off that app. Even if you do a couple questions a day, that definitely just helps get your brain warmed up. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. I really appreciate you watching. If you need to reach out, please reach out to Shelly or I, and we really wish you luck in your test taking, and we hope you do great. Awesome. Have a good one.